Hello, my name's Justin the Clue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And this month, it's Shocktober. That was Frankenstein's monster.
Oh,
I'm taking it up.
I thought that was something else.
And this week, we're talking about writer, director, special effects maestro Brian Paulin.
Yeah, this is an episode, another in a long line of episodes where I feel like we're breaking new ground a little bit, because this is a filmmaker who's been working for over 30 years, and he's known among fans of shot-on-video horror movies, but I haven't seen a lot of critical discourse, haven't seen a lot of podcasts. He's a well-kept secret, I think.
Now, this is one of those examples of a filmmaker that, because of what I was interested when I was really getting into cinema, I assume everybody knows. Oh, Brian Paul, of course. Like, you know, Bone Sickness, Unearthed Films, put it out on DVD. We all know that filmography, right?
This was almost exactly the conversation we had last week, where you were like, I want to do Brian Paulin. Surely you've heard of At Dawn They Sleep, because Saturn Score put it out. And I stared at Justin blankly, had no idea who this was.
It's a little mainstream, I know, but
yeah.
But so Brian Paulin, I don't know where I heard about him. Maybe probably on like the Zombie Keeper forums or something like that.
But this was a long time ago, like when you were really young.
Yeah, so I remember probably renting from Suspect Video in Toronto, Bone Sickness.
Okay.
And like watching it and being like, what is this? This is wild. Because Brian Paulin, like, he started making movies in the 90s, and he was doing stuff like even zombie stuff before it became really popular. And he's been making movies. I remember like looking up and seeing that he's still making movies to this day. So I assume that there was, you know, some system of success or even money that would allow
that he was making profit, and
Yes.
with that profit, he would make the next movie.
Incorrect, based on all the interviews that I've read that he's done.
So he's a Massachusetts-based filmmaker.
That's it. That's right.
In 1990, with his friend Rich George, who is his bestie, his collaborator on all
still
sorts of
works
stuff.
with him on everything. Basically, his, you know, partner in crime.
In 1990, together they founded Morbid Visions, which is their, maybe production company is too big a word, their label.
Their label, basically.
Their Moturn Media.
Exactly.
And Paulin was a huge fan of horror movies. He loved especially gory horror movies. This would have been at the time that like Fangoria magazine was huge. And Tom Savini, the special effects artist who did all the gore effects on Dawn of the Dead and the Friday the 13th movies, he'd become sort of an alt celebrity.
Oh, yeah. So if you're reading Fangoria, like, Tom Savini is basically your god. And he did a, like, makeup effects tutorial thing that you could send out for. And Brian Paulin got that. And that, you know, based on interviews that I've read with Brian, it just kind of like, okay, I can do this now. I can go out and I can do these gore effects.
He spent years, like, just as a hobby, learning how to be Tom Savini, basically. And then after watching so many gory horror movies, he basically said, I'm not seeing gory enough stuff. I want to make my own horror
Well, because like
movies.
if he's making movies in the 90s, like this was kind of a dry time, if you like, gory, Fulci-esque, even what Tom Savini was doing back in the day, because you're dealing with like the death of 80s mom and pop video store. Any horror film that anybody makes will get on the shelf beside the big release, because we just need to stuff to fill the shelf. And more slick kind of like into the mid-90s, gore stuff is going away. Exploitation is not as interesting.
When I think of the early 90s, so like throughout the 1980s, you have like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, those slasher franchises. And then Scream comes in the, 1996, I guess.
Yeah.
And that launches a new wave. But in the early to mid-90s, I kind of think of movies like, I don't know, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or Wolf with Jack Nicholson.
Well, even like a direct-to-video stuff, they're pulling away because the MPAA went crazy during the 80s. Of like, you can't show violence, especially if it's like exploitative in a horror film. So filmmakers are taking a step back away from that. And Brian Paulin is a guy that's like probably importing Lucio Fulci's on VHS. And he's like, why can't I see this? I just want to put it up on screen in the way that it kind of shocked me when I saw it early on. And if I can, take it to the next level.
Can we talk about, this isn't chronologically, but can we talk about Bone Sickness first?
All right, let's do it first.
Because of the three that I saw, I feel like this might be the most like, this is the Brian Paulin mission statement, basically. So this movie came out in 2004. It's about, I'll briefly describe the plot. There's a woman who's caring for her husband, who's
played by Rich George,
who's very sick. He has a terminal disease. Nobody knows how to cure it, except for Brian Paulin, who's in all his movies. He looks a bit like Jesse Plemons.
Yeah, he does look like Jesse Plemons. Ginger hair, long hair down to his shoulders. You will be shocked that Brian Paulin is really into like dark metal and stuff like that. I mean, gore and dark metal, it seems like they're so distant from each other.
And this guy who works at the morgue, he has, a new last ditch medication or treatment.
Nothing is working. How can I save my friend?
So he gives rotting corpse marrow to the friend. And at first it seems like it might help, but he starts vomiting worms.
And vomiting worms. And
it's like, this corpse marrow, it's too rotten. Like maybe we need to get like a fresher, a newer corpse marrow.
Will that lead to maybe murders happening and then that being fed to his friend unwillingly at first?
And so what you really need to know is, so that's the plot.
Yeah.
And the second half is the zombie apocalypse.
That's, just basically gore. Now, I want to talk about gore a little bit, Will, because, if people know me, they're like, Justin, he loves that kind of stuff. Bodies being ripped apart, heads being, blown up. And it's like, yeah, I do like that, but I don't really like meanness, if you know what I mean.
Well, okay, so there's a very famous underground horror movie called August Underground, which is a found footage horror movie that is like from the perspective of serial killers. And I've never actually seen it, but it's famously like really gnarly and nasty and cruel. And it's an endurance test.
And I'm just bringing this up because, like, okay, would you slot something like Brian Paulin's films under that? And I'm going to say no. And I'll tell you why. Because these films are not funny. In the sense that, like, there could be, like, some comedic elements here or there, maybe a line, but, like, this gore is presented seriously.
And the actors they're not giving camp performances, at least not intentionally.
Yeah, they're doing it as straight as possible.
And there's, like, heavy metal music that plays on the soundtrack, and you're supposed to watch it and say, like, oh!
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what attracts me to a film like this is, like, how imaginative it is, how ambitious it is, which... These films are basically like garage gore movies that, like, a lot of them are shot in their garages. Like, so when the zombies and bone sickness start coming out of the ground and it looks, I mean, I say this in the nicest way possible, like Plan 9 from Outer Space, where it's like a black background, there's colored lights, there's fog, and there's tombstones.
And also it's like a 90s or 2000 shot on video movie. And if you've seen any of those, you often know that they're working at like their homes,
it's all their homes,
their parents' houses, or wherever they were living,
their backyards.
So there are all these scenes that are taking place in the light switch behind them. You've got a closet door behind them. Like the mise en scène is of a suburban home where there's a portal to hell that's been unlocked.
That all this really gross stuff is happening. And now it is gross, but it's like a grossness that I feel there's almost a joie de vivre behind it.
Well, okay, like for example, in Bone Sickness, the whole second half is just like one gory tableau after another, up to and including there's a scene where like there's a pregnant woman and like somebody like saws open her stomach
and she gets burst to like a bone man. Basically.
Yeah. Now, so I say that and that sounds pretty gross, but like, yeah, as you're saying, well, first of all, there's a kind of tension between the what it's depicting and the world that it's depicting it in, which is this like suburban, like,
kind of bland. It's shot on digital video, which was like a big thing during the time because cameras that were not as accessible as they are now, and so because of that, it does have that feel of a home video. Like there's the textural qualities to it,
and it looks fake.
Yes,
but it's fake in a way.
I mean, it looks fake. But in like the best fake way, when you're looking at a practical effect.
Well, my overwhelming feeling watching these movies was this feeling of like you start it and it's like, oh, okay, I get it. It's kind of a bad shot on video movie, and then as it goes along, there keep being stunts and gore effects where you're like, oh, that's actually kind of impressive. Like, how did they pull that off? That's like for a movie that was shot in somebody's parents' house. Like, wow.
They say that none of their movies have ever had any funding, that they've all been paid out of pocket by them.
And so, like, for me, the biggest pleasure of these movies is that feeling. It's that feeling of being like, oh, wow, I can't believe they did that in this movie. They pulled off a special effect like that. And when I'm thinking of, other kind of gore movies that I would put this in the lineage of, Lucio Fulci in his Italian horror movies, I think understood, oftentimes the special effects in Fulci's movies, like you can tell it's fake.
Yeah.
Like in the Beyond where the spiders tear the guy's face apart. It looks fake. It looks like pipe cleaner spiders, but there's just something about the texture of it.
But I wouldn't want it to look real.
No.
The second it looks real, I'm like, well, I don't want to see that.
And like Fulci and Paulin both understand that like sometimes just the texture of the gore, like the way, how goopy and
I do think that Paulin, because he's pushing it to such a surreal level that you're getting something else out of just like, oh, that's gross. It's like you said, it's like, I can't believe I'm seeing this on screen right now. And we got to be clear, Bone Sickness is a film that like, it basically devolves into like, oh, just 30 minutes of gore of people being like, oh, to the point that the main characters die. And I'm like, how is there 15 minutes left of this movie?
Well, yeah, and it's so unapologetically what it is. I mean, I'm also impressed in Bone Sickness just by the scale of it, because again, this is a home movie, and yet there's a whole army siege scene. Like, it's in a parking lot where there are like army guys with guns and stuff. It feels like this whole choreographed scene, and you think this is not bad for something that was shot like in a lunch hour.
Yeah. I mean, well, it probably took years and years to finish something like this.
Yeah.
And and that's something else that attracts me to it, is this level of craft and ambition when none of the movies that they've done have resulted in anything that would allow them to go to the next level. In the sense that like no one comes out of the woodwork and goes, hey, I'll give you money to distribute this film, even though that, you know what? I may have had a little bit of a fib, because they did shoot Mummy Raider in 2002 for whatever company was putting out Misty Monday films at that point.
Okay, so this is like the height.
Yeah.
This is the biggest star they've ever worked with. Misty Monday.
Wait, who's Misty Monday, Will?
She is, basically, she worked in like, maybe not Wave Productions, but stuff like Wave Productions. Sorry if we've lost you with this like string of references to obscure movies.
And I've never heard him talk about how she got involved or how he got involved in that movie, but the film does not seem to be of his passions. It's less than an hour. It's mostly a lesbian sex scene, and there's no real big gore stuff.
So they start making movies around 1990, and then they're working for 10 years just making these backyard movies.
Yeah.
Until finally a company comes along. I don't know what company it is.
I do. It's EI Entertainment, I believe, is the name of the company. And the company says, EI Cinema is the name of the company. They saw, I think, an ad in the back of a like magazine somewhere, and they had just completed a movie called Soon to Be Dead, or it has two titles. Kill Me Slowly, I believe, is the title the company gave it. Soon to Be Dead was their title. And they had seen a bunch of John Woo films in the early 90s, and they're like, we love these. Let's just make one of our own.
And Rich
Brian
George
Paulin
had,
and Rich George, So they went out and they shot like a John Woo, Quentin Tarantino-esque inspired film, but with like wild stunts and gunplay that nobody else was making at this point, unless you were working with a budget.
Right. So this company had seen their work and said, we're going to give you a little bit of money.
No, they gave them no money.
They gave them no money. No, they offered distribution.
They offered distribution, yes. Okay. They said, if you give us a movie that has vampire women in it and has the action that you have in the previous film, we'll distribute it.
Right. And so this movie, which is probably their best known movie, it's called At Dawn They Sleep.
And it's only their best known because, like Will said at the beginning of the episode, Saturn's Core recently put it out, but even he was like, huh? What? What's that?
It is on Blu-ray. You can get it, and it's well worth getting.
Yep.
So Paulin stars as a drug lord. And immediately I like this movie because it's like, it feels like a bunch of kids, like teenagers like making their Tarantino movie where it's like, oh, fuck this, fuck that, fuck. So he's a drug lord. So is Rich George.
Yep. They're two pals.
They're partners in crime.
Men.
And they find themselves very early on at war with another crime syndicate when a deal goes south. And there's a lot of very Tarantino-ish dialogue in those early scenes. And the movie is obviously heavily inspired by From Dusk Till Dawn, because it begins as a crime movie and you've got a lot of John Woo style bullet ballet stuff.
Wild, the John Woo, which I'm like, I hope nobody got hurt doing this.
Yeah, I love this stuff. And then halfway through, or really 1/3 of the way through, it becomes a vampire movie.
Yes, they basically meet angels who have sex with them.
And angels, yes, they're angels, but it's not like what you've heard at church.
No, they turn them into vampires, and you're not afraid of crosses. Sunlight doesn't really bother you. It just makes you weaker. Because listen, it's tough to shoot at night, especially action scenes. So we got to shoot these out in the daytime.
And there's a little bit of softcore porn in this movie, too.
So what's funny about that is that the distributor was like, hey, can you have more like vampire, like lady seeds? People really love those. And they were like, okay, it's not really our thing, but we'll go and shoot it. And what they shot was like two sex workers that they hired going down on each other. And warning to anybody who may bother. At one point, one of them rips like the labia off the other. And this is just disconnected from anything going on in the movie. We just cut away to it.
Now, guys, that sounds really unpleasant.
Yes.
But I'm here to tell you, it's not that bad.
No, it's just
it's silly.
liquid latex that's being pulled off.
It's silly. It's fun.
Yeah. And so what this movie is interesting is that, like, I said they were inspired by John Woo movies before, the last film they made. In this one, they had clearly gone to Chinatown and rented, like, Chinese Ghost Story, Bride with White Hair. You know this because there's a scene where they're all looking at them on Laserdisc and they show the camera. And there's also stuff that, like, no movies was doing at this point. Like, there's a very, if you know Hong Kong cinema, at one point, you know, our two leads have turned into vampires and they're fighting each other. And one of them, like, shoots his sleeve out, which grows really long and, like, wraps around the other guy.
And like the other movies I saw, there's a mixture in here of, like, very amateurish filmmaking with stuff that's kind of impressive.
Yes.
And so, like, who's the, like, Dark Angel guy, you know,
he's just like a demon man, like a full body that's Rich George under the suit.
Right. Okay, like when that character comes up and he's lit very well, you know, to basically hide any imperfections in the makeup effects, you look at it and you think, okay, like I don't know how they quite pulled this effect off, but it looks good
with a lot of time and a lot of work. And like a lot of these movies, he said that in interviews that A Dawn They Sleep is the last full screenplay that he wrote because he found that the movies took so long to make that, like, he would basically just shoot parts and then look at what he has and then keep shooting more parts. Like, At Dawn They Sleep, like a lot of their films, devolves into, like, long action scenes, long gore scenes, a lot of stuff that I find so delightful what is implied, like them flying is them in front of a black wall with fog being thrown in their face, or them crashing into a house will be them landing on a bed and, like, a couple pieces of wood will be thrown off screen.
I also recommend this movie. Like, if you watch one of the three that I watched, I recommend this one because it feels like a collection of stuff that a movie buff man in his early 20s
loves
in 1999 loves.
Before it's cool. None of this stuff is really cool, and people that are making movies low budget during this period.
Yeah, and so it's just a lot of cool stuff, not particularly connected.
Yeah.
And also, some of the stunts in this movie are really
bananas.
impressive.
Yes.
Like, there are some car stunts that are actually kind of amazing.
So Paulin says that Rich George went to, like, a stunt school for a summer and he came back and he knew how to do these things, like lighting themselves on fire or doing those, like, car kind of, like, flips so they land on the top.
There's also a scene where, like, Brian Paulin is being chased by a car and he runs into a house. And the house is obviously, it doesn't have a ceiling. It's just like the front of a house, but it's the front of a house with a living room.
Yeah.
And the car crashes into it.
So they built this, for this one shot, they built the front of a house with furniture and they just so he could go in and the car just crashed right into it.
And this is, like, what I like about these movies just in 2 seconds. It's like this wonderful mixture of, like, really impressive and also incredibly fake.
What's funny about that shot is, like, if they just zoomed in a little bit, it would look a little faker because you can kind of see the top.
A little less fake, yeah.
A little less fake, yeah. That's what I mean.
Because you can see that it doesn't have a roof.
But is that maybe a joke? Like, they're like, I like it.
Maybe.
You know, it passes
I
so
like
fast.
it. I like it. I wouldn't change it.
Who's going to pay attention to that? So At Dawn They Sleep, they were like, finally, we're being distributed. They said you could pick it up in a video store and it was put in the pornography section. Rich George says that he would go into the local store and, like, take At Dawn They Sleep and put it in the horror section.
Well, because you look at the original box art and it looks like a Misty Monday movie.
Yeah,
you know?
It's like a vampire woman with teeth, like, ah. It looks like any other of the other vampire films that were coming out around that point. In the night, they love those sexy vampires. It was flooded with, like, you got a bordello, you got a vampire. Is it From Dusk Till Dawn that did that? Like,
I think so, yeah.
Because, like, it always existed. Like, Vampirella is that sexy vampire, but it was really big. That's why you have, like, companies like Redemption. Remember them?
Yeah.
Their logo was literally like a vampire woman.
Yeah.
So after At Dawn They Sleep, he kept making movies like Bone Sickness, which we went over. And I asked Will, I wanted to do something a little bit more modern. CRYPTIC PLASM from 2015.
Right. I like this one. I like it a little bit less than the others. Like, a lot of it's a found footage horror movie, which I feel like I've seen a lot of those. And it's more of a slow burn, I think, than some of the other ones. Although, again, when you get to the last third, it again becomes an excuse for gore.
Yes.
And actually, what I like about it in this context is, so those movies are, you know, at the turn of the millennium. This one comes in 2015, by which time gore effects are basically a thing of the past. Like,
yeah, you could do it in CG. Why would you use gore?
So now this movie feels like Brian Paulin is back in the early 90s doing all this taking up as a hobby gore effects and makeup stuff because he wants to be Tom Savini. And by now, there is no Tom Savini anymore. He's like, you would watch this movie because nobody's making anything like this.
Exactly. And if you look at Cryptic Plasms, what's funny about it is if I put it beside Bone Sickness, I went, which one came out first? You'd be like, oh, I don't know.
Exactly. Exactly. So, okay, I watched this movie and I didn't realize it was as late as 2015.
I know, me too. I looked at the date, I was like, whoa.
I thought it was like 2008 or something. Yeah.
And so like it is a found footage film, but he gets bored with that pretty fast. And I thought it would be an interesting watch because it's not a zombie film. It's not a vampire one. It's kind of like weird, supernatural, unspecified, like H.P. Lovecraft-ish, where it's like wormholes are opening. Like one of the first shots of the movie is a guy whose like guts are hanging out of his mouth, being like, oh, they're just floating in the air. And that's definitely fun, but it is like, I guess, on the same wavelengths as, you know, the other stuff that he's made.
I like that he's remained sort of true to his vision over the years. I mean, I guess a found footage horror movie would have been sort of trendy at the time, but I mean, for the most part, it just kind of feels like he's got this little corner of the universe where he makes these movies where he's very single-mindedly focused on the gore.
Yeah,
and he
his
just likes
garage.
it, and he just wants to keep doing that.
I would love to know his thought process now because like he hasn't made any money on his movies, but he clearly loves doing it and can't imagine. I know he's shooting a new movie right now, but it's like at that point you're doing it kind of like Matt Farley and Charlie Roxburgh, right? That you're doing it just like for ourselves because I can't imagine doing anything else.
So I'm impressed consistently by the resourcefulness of the movies. They're consistently better than they should be.
Yeah. And they're also doing stuff that no one else is doing in this form. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what an exploitation movie has traditionally done. It looks at what do the majors not provide or can't provide and will provide it. If I can introduce, like, I like these movies, so now I'm just playing devil's advocate here to introduce some productive tension.
Yeah.
When I watch a movie like Things, the great Canadian no-budget horror movie, you know, that's a movie everyone thinks is so bad it's good, but within it, it creates a new world. Everything is so off that as a result, it becomes otherworldly. Now, if I watch something like Blonde Death or Don't Let the River Beast Get You, very different kind of movie. Those are movies where I really find myself drawn into those worlds on their own terms. With these movies, I don't get drawn into the worlds. Like, I'm constantly aware of how artificial it is. And I'm constantly aware of like, oh, here are some guys in the suburbs in Massachusetts acting like they're Tarantino characters. And so I don't get enveloped in it in the same way. I feel a certain remove.
But that could also be because these kind of things don't attract you in that way, in the same way that they attract me.
Maybe.
And that like the fact that when he came at the worst time to make movies, like basically the late 90s, where there is not really a market for this, and the market that exists is overflooded with bad versions of these movies. But the consistency and the extremity that he's delivering this product, no one else is doing it like him.
That's true.
It's that purity of vision, I think, is very important, and also the singularity. Like, you could say, oh, you could just watch a Gore, you know, clip show if you want to see Gore. And it's like, but it's not the same thing when you know that it's being created by this one team of people that are doing it probably in their parents' garage, and that they're spending weeks and weeks and weeks just to get like a skeleton who has sex with an angel who comes so hard that like jizz jumps out of his mouth.
And I love the way that the camera just focuses on these things.
It loves it.
Like if there's a shot of a drill going into someone's face, you know, the camera will just park itself in front of it and like, look at this. Look at this effect that we've created. Isn't this cool? That's the thing that comes across.
And I want to emphasize as well is that like I was unclear until I started doing this episode how little kind of like notice that he has from even the horror community, that like he's been chugging along at it. And like I was looking at his Instagram and he goes to conventions around Massachusetts, like, because he can go there. But like someone's like, oh, you should come to Monsterpalooza, and he's like, yeah, I'd love to come to Monsterpalooza. Why aren't they flying him down to Monsterpalooza?
Why do you think these movies haven't gained traction outside of a very small cult?
I think maybe availability is a big issue, that they've never really had any distribution other than at Dawn They Sleep and Bone Sickness. And even Bone Sickness, if you want to buy that on DVD now, it's like $150.
And maybe also because people, you know, the average, you know, John and Jane Q popcorn don't like a movie that looks like a home movie.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. But like here, I feel like this is a time where like if these were on Tubi, these would be the ones people would share around. Like, I can't, have you seen this?
Right.
Like, there's nothing else like this, but they're not available. I'm not sure if he's just kind of jaded, like that he's been burned so many times, he doesn't want to do that kind of stuff. But I feel like he's one of those horror guys that like he feels just under the level of getting like a big audience of people who can appreciate what he's doing, and like because no one else is doing it. I will say the At Dawn They Sleep Blu-ray does its best effort at making you a Brian Paulin fan. It has 2 commentary tracks. It has a making of. It has his first feature film, which was shot on VHS, which is called A Reap of Evil from 1994. So like, if you want to get into Brian Paulin stuff, you buy the At Dawn They Sleep Blu-ray, which Saturn Score put out. You can get it through the Vinegar Syndrome store. Also,
you've been listening to some of his director's commentaries this week. Do you have any stories you can share?
I mean, he's just such an affable guy, like him and Rich George. Like, they'll watch a gore scene and be like, oh, gross, I can't believe we did that. Like, Bone Sickness, the version that anyone can see now, is very interesting because it's the second version of the movie. Basically, they finished the film, they released it themselves. They said we sold like 14 VHS tapes, basically.
Oh my God.
And then Unearthed Film says, hey, we want to put it on DVD. And they went, okay. And they shot like 10 more minutes of gore for it. So like the version that we watch has 10 extra minutes of gore stuff in it. Because they're like, we want to, you know, people who bought it before, those 14 people, we want to give them something more. We want to like, there's that like need to please in his cinema and a love for it. That while it's exploitative, it's not like they're doing it just for the passion of the game.
What does Brian Paulin do for a living?
I'm not 100% sure. I know during the time of Bone Sickness, they mentioned that the morgue that they're shooting in is like the meat processing plant that they work at.
Oh, so, man. Yeah. Now, if that doesn't feed his muse, I don't know what would.
I do know that looking at his Instagram, he's still making movies. And then if you want to buy his films, he sells them himself on eBay. And I got to say, I looked and it's like 100-something of these copies of these DVDs sold. Like, what? Come on, people, buy these movies.
Well, let's start the revolution right now.
Yeah, so if you search Morbid Vision Films eBay, you can see like he's selling most of his new ones. So like Fetus, Cryptic Plasm, I think Septic is up there as well. All these gross sounding titles. I also think that like something that's hurt maybe his recent films is that they are similar looking and they just have like gross names. Like if you look on Letterboxd, it's a little difficult to tell them apart because it's like Septic, Fetus, and it's like just a gross close-up image of you're not quite sure what it is.
Well, I think the ones that I saw were all very joyous experiences. So
would highly recommend. So as per usual, you can send us emails at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. But you know what? Before we get to that, what are we doing on our Patreon this week, Will?
Well, there's a scene in Bone Sickness, as I said, where a character eats a bunch of worms or throws up a bunch of worms, has a bunch of worms in his mouth.
Yeah, he throws up a bunch of worms and then they sit there and then he picks them up and starts eating them.
And this put me in mind of the Citizen Kane of worm-eating movies. I refer, of course, to 1977's The Worm Eaters, the directorial debut of Herb Robbins, a movie famous for featuring a lot of scenes where people eat worms. This is a movie that scarred me horribly when I saw it as a child, and now we revisit it. And is it great?
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah. I was shocked to learn that Will had not seen this movie since the first viewing when he was a kid.
Not because I was boycotting it, but because I had better things to do.
But you own the VHS. Not only did you never watch it again, you threw it away.
Because I disliked it so much when I was in grade 5. So.
And Will was shocked as we discussed it. He's like, I haven't talked about it that much, have I? It's like, you have.
This is the thing. If you put a microphone in front of me multiple times a week for years, I only have so much life.
So our first letter is from Zach, and the title is I Broke Kevin Smith's.
Oh, well, I hope you put them back together. Jeez.
Hey, Justin and Will. As I was enjoying your latest Patreon episode on the 430 movie, I realized the time had finally come to share my Kevin Smith story.
So, for context, on our Patreon last week, we talked about Kevin Smith's brand new film.
And if you thought we were all tapped out from doing a Patreon episode on him the time before, you would be wrong.
We have so many Patreon episodes about Kevin Smith. We just can't quit him. I don't know.
So the letter continues. I had the unique honor of asking Kevin a question during the Clerk 3 tour in Montreal fall 2022.
It's not that unique an honor. I think a lot of people have over the years.
Just before his breakdown. After sitting through the dreadful Clerk 3, I was still eager to treat Kevin, once my favorite director, like a real filmmaker. So I asked him if he ever thought about the future potential for Jay and Silent Bob, the Escuniverse, once he's gone. I framed this around...
Oh my God, could you imagine?
I framed this around how Clerk 3 and Jay and Silent Bob reboot were both broadly about IP reboots, nepotism, and death. I swear I asked respectfully. It was the only question that night that didn't get a long, rehearsed, unrelated comedic monologue for an answer. Instead, Kevin paused and then thoughtfully said it had never crossed his mind once. Perhaps that's funny in some way in its own right. He then seemed a little dazed from the question and went back to retelling old Smodcastle stories. I couldn't stay any longer after that. Months later, when I heard of his breakdown, I have to admit, I worried that if nothing else, maybe I didn't help on that tour, or maybe I got through to him. Regardless, I'm glad he's happier now. Babble the fuck on, Zach.
I think that's an interesting thing to ask Kevin Smith, because we know that Kevin Smith, loves IP. He loves Marvel and DC movies. He loves seeing the same characters over and over and over again. But when you post that to him, something as personal as Jay and Silent Bob, something that is ripped from his very heart, continuing on without him just as an empty piece of detritus. I hope Kevin ponders that a little bit.
Well, I mean, if I was Kevin Smith in that situation, I would go snoochie boochie. No,
I'd say, check out my comic book store in Red Bank, New Jersey, and hey, check out my website. You can get some T-shirts and bobbleheads and knickknacks.
Jay and Silent Bob bookshelves.
For $100.
No, don't go there, Will. I would probably just say, listen, when I'm dead, it's gone. If it continues after me, I don't care.
I think that's the correct answer. When I'm dead, I'm worm food.
Yeah, to be eaten.
Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. Let's all go.
Listen to the Patreon episode for the context of that song. But I would also say that, are they dead at this point? They're basically zombies, right? Jay and Silent Bob.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, Jay and Silent Bob, they live on in my heart.
Forever. And we have the movies to enjoy with them as well. I mean, it would be nice for Kevin Smith to do what he did after Strike Back, closing the book.
Retire.
The Askew-universe. But he can't, because that's what... is his career. And he said before in an interview, he doesn't make any new fans. I don't think he does.
So we talked about this, but I understand that actually there are a lot of people who watch Tusk on Netflix.
Oh, do they become Kevin Smith?
I don't know if they become Kevin Smith fans.
It's not the same, though.
But Tusk has a following. Now, should it? I don't think so, but it does.
Yeah.
And so you have to hand it to Tusk. Tusk is an original film.
Yep.
Nobody else has made anything like it.
Yoga Hosers is an original film.
And that's why it ranks so high in our
controversial
rankings.
What is it above? It's above Clerks 2. Oh, that was a...
Yoga Hosers above Clerks 2. Well, I don't want to watch either of them.
Yeah, but if I put a gun in your head, you got to watch one. Probably not Clerks 2.
I don't know. I can't keep talking about this.
This is your hell, Will, or your heaven. Our next question is from Nick, and they ask, the genius of Albert Zugsmith. Dear Justin and Will, congrats on the 400th episode. Since you didn't mention it, I'd like to point out your Lizzie Borden interview as a definite highlight of the podcast so far.
Thank you. That was great. Yeah.
She reached out to us, actually.
Yeah.
I recently watched Love Crimes, which led me to re-listening to your episode, which gives important context to a compromised film from an important director. I'm not sure if the filmmaker has been talked about yet on the pod. I'm curious your opinion on Albert Zugsmith, director of films such as Confessions of an Opium Eater, starring Vincent Price, and Sex Kittens Go to College, featuring Mamie Van Doren, Tuesday Weld, and Bridget Bardot's sister, Mijanu Bardot. These seem right up your alley, and Sex Kittens, by my money, may be an unsung masterpiece. Whenever I dig into the Zugsmith's well, he's got many producer credits as well, it feels like I've struck gold. And if you ever did a Mamie Van Doren episode, that would make my day. Thanks for all the great film...
Make my day.
Make my day. Going to my Jerry Lewis impersonation. Thanks for all the great film talk, Nick.
Well, you just... scratch the surface of who's in Sex Kittens Go to College, because it also has Jackie Coogan, John Carradine, Charlie Chaplin Jr., and Vampira.
Have you explored the filmography of Charlie Chaplin Jr.?
No, not really. He had a tragic life. He died very young.
Oh, he did? Okay. So we don't want to get into that.
But hey,
Wait, there's another Chaplin that became an actor.
There's Sidney Chaplin.
Yeah.
And they were brothers with the same mother. And Sidney Chaplin's in... Well, actually, so I learned this from my partner. Barbara Streisand's autobiography has a lot of good stories about Sidney Chaplin, because I guess she dated him at one point and broke it off with him, and they were still doing Funny Girl on Broadway. And, during quiet scenes, he would be whispering in her ear, you fucking cunt.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. So that's some Sidney Chaplin gossip.
Did he have a daughter that became an actor too?
Oh yeah, Geraldine Chaplin.
Yeah, Geraldine Chaplin.
Of Nashville and a million movies. Yeah,
she did a million things.
Yeah. Did he have a daughter?
Well, here's upcoming will be the Chaplin Brood episode.
There's also a granddaughter or maybe a great granddaughter who's on Game of Thrones.
Huh.
Yeah. So anyway, Albert Zugsmith.
Now, you've seen Confessions of an Opium Eater, right?
I have not.
What? Really?
It's good, right?
That's a big Joe Dante, like, I can't believe this movie exists recommendation.
Yeah, I should see it. I don't know if I've seen an Albert Zugsmith movie, which is shameful.
Shameful, yeah. But wait.
Put him on the list. Let's do Zugsmith.
Did you see his credits as producer? There's probably one. Yeah. Oh, because he did Touch of Evil, Written on the Wind, The Incredible Shrinking Man.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I've seen a lot of those.
High School Confidential, but that doesn't count, right?
A lot of Mamie Van Doren stuff. Oh, Invasion USA.
MST3K Classic.
Yeah, I love him as a producer. As a director, I'm less familiar.
Lots to explore there.
Yeah. You need to do an episode on him. This is great. I'm glad the listener brought him up.
I would have assumed, like, Will knows that guy, old hat, but...
I mean, I know who he is.
Yeah.
But...
Are you sure? Because didn't we do a Vincent Price episode? I could have sworn we both watched Confessions of an Opium Eater.
I didn't.
No? Okay.
Wait, hang on. Let me check Letterboxd. No, I've not seen.
Okay. So lots to explore. Yeah, Confessions of an Opium Eater is wild.
I would love to see it.
Okay.
Let's do this really soon.
All right. So again, if you want to send us letters, it's important cinema club podcast @gmail.com.
Now, I also want to plug an event that we have coming up.
Oh, that's right.
You've probably already heard about this, folks.
Yep.
November 5th, which I believe is election night.
Wait, it is election night.
Okay, so you could be looking at the news from the United States.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you rather?
I didn't realize. Did you just realize that now?
Yes,
or?
I did. I said November 5th, and I thought, wait a minute.
Yeah.
November 5th, okay?
Yeah.
Come on down to the Fox Theater in Toronto. The Fox Theater, because we are showing Fantasy Mission Force with Jackie Chan.
Do you want the film to end and then Will to come on stage to tell you who won the election? Because that'll probably happen.
You are going to have... So you could be looking at that little New York Times needle.
What? Nate Silver's wrong again? Yeah, he's always fucking wrong. Why does anybody listen to him?
You could be looking at Michigan. You could be looking at Pennsylvania. Or you could be looking at a movie with Jackie Chan, Amazon women, hopping vampires, kung fu, music, a whole mess of fun. So Fantasy Mission Force at the Fox Theater. Get your tickets.
Yeah, celebrate Election Day with Jackie Chan in his contractually mandated motion picture.
He literally has a gun to his head to make this movie.
All right, so what are we doing next week, Will?
Frankenstein.
Ooh, I love it. James Whale, Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, no.
Whoa, what?
Every Shocktober, we like to do a franchise. And what about the mother of all horror franchises, Universal's Frankenstein series? But we're not going to talk about the James Whale ones, the ones that are some of the high watermarks of horror history. Yeah, the good ones. We're going to talk about Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, some of the sequels.
Oh, John Carradine, my favorite actor. He's in these, right? And he's always a mark of quality.
That's right. And look, I love Universal horror. I love the neo-expressionist lighting. I love the laboratories.
Do people these days, our age, love Universal horror films in the same way the Monster Kids had to love and just watch them endlessly because that's all they had?
I don't get the sense they do.
Because I don't think like people like we could say we love Universal horror. We're not picking Son of Frankenstein and watch it every year, probably like they would multiple times a year.
I love Bride.
Yeah, I mean Bride is great. Yeah. Son of Frankenstein, great sets. I've seen it.
You know, I watched these movies as a kid, and so they are baked into my brain as like what horror looks like. So
we're gonna explore it. Are we gonna find untold depths?
No, I know we're not because I've seen these. I've seen them multiple times.
Where do you stand on the Frankenstein monster? Is he a favorite?
I love him.
Oh, you love him?
Look at him. He's great.
He's great, yeah. But only the Universal version. We don't want none of those bootlegs.
Look, fire bad, friend good.
Yeah.
I've said it over and over again.
Classic Frankenstein. And that's what we'll be doing next week. And until then, my name's Justin DeClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. I would like to thank some of our new patrons who include Kenny Jones, Clayton Smith, Palm Frond, Michael, Claire, Alex Hecht, Ray, Alex, Sean Hawkins, Eric Schos Ustrud. Please, hello. Thank you very much for all becoming patrons. We could not keep doing this without you. Woo!
Well, I went to see a movie at Eyesore Cinema this week. Eyesore Cinema, if you're an out-of-towner and you want to know things to do in Toronto, we actually have 2 video stores in Toronto.
Yeah. Down from the 15 we used to have.
Yeah.
2Q Videos have multiple video stores. Queen Video has 2.
We lasted a long time into, into the Netflix revolution. But about 10 years ago, they started dropping like flies.
Yep.
But there's Bay Street Video.
Yep.
You need no introduction.
No.
And then there's Eyesore Cinema, which feels very handcrafted.
Now, what's amazing about Eyesore Cinema is I used to work there when it used to be above Rotate This, and that like it looked kind of half finished the entire time I worked there. And then they got this new space, they built it out over years, and it looks exactly the same. Like they built it to look exactly the same.
Well, they still don't have a sign outside.
No, they just like all that wood that's like painted red, which I'm like, oh, that's just like the transition thing, right? Like, no, that's how he likes Daniel, who runs the store. Yeah.
And Daniel, who runs the store, is a real Randall from Clerks.
Yes.
So I'll tell you, I went to see the movie this week. I went to see Seeding of a Ghost, the great
Shaw
Brothers
yeah.
horror film. And they have a space in the back. If you're visiting Toronto, check out what's on at Eyesore. It's
There's
kind
something
of like,
almost every night.
It's kind of like what Spectacle is in Brooklyn. Great little community there, putting on the weirdest movies of all time. And I came in and I didn't have any cash, and I said to Daniel, and Daniel's the kind of guy who, like, if you go up to buy something from him, you might be like, excuse me, can I buy this? And he'll say like, I don't know, can you? He's that kind of guy.
Yeah. But in a smiling way.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's part of the charm of the place. But I go up and I say, oh, can I pay with debit? And he goes, nope. And he says, we're trying to normalize cash only because paying by card costs us money. And I say, oh, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do then. He says, well, you can go order the ticket on Eventbrite. And I say, okay, I'll check. Oh, it's 8:01. I can't anymore.
Yeah.
It's like,
who was organizing it? You can just go up to them, couldn't you?
Well, yeah, this is the thing. So it's like, I spend like 10 minutes trying to figure out how to pay. And he's like, oh, I just e-transfer it to me later. Here, come into the back room.
Yeah.
And he goes, all right, I got another one for you. He didn't have cash in front of everyone there. All 15 people there. That's the Eyesore experience.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, I had a great time watching Seeding of a Ghost. I mean, if you want to, this is for truly advanced individuals. If you want to watch horror movies, Shaw Brothers horror movies of the early 80s, really slimy, really disgusting, just a great time.
Is that the director of The Boxer's Omen made that one?
No, even better, the director of The Image of Bruce Lee.
Right. Yeah, that's right. One of those guys. How did the audience react to the movie?
Oh, politely. I don't know.
Like, they were like, woo!
I wouldn't say we were hooting and hollering.
No.
You know?
I love that Eyesore back room because it's just like 20 chairs, I think. It's not many.
They're not that comfortable.
No, they're not that comfortable.
The sight lines are bad.
Yes.
The screen's not very big. It's projected
high.
from a laptop.
Yep. That's what you want.
There's shit everywhere, you know?
Oh, yeah.
It's like being in a garage.
There's like monsters and stuff that Adam Thorne he's been shooting is just like laying around.
Yeah, and I saw Adam Thorne and he showed me the basement, and it was great because I've seen the basement in Adam's movies.
Multiple times.
In Rock and Roll Asylum and in Amityville Outhouse. And so it felt like being at Chinachita.
Rock and Roll Asylum available at goldenninjavideo.com.
For the out-of-towners, Eyesore is a great place to visit because you'll never know what's there, you know, on their used racks.
Oh, you never know.
Zines and stuff.
Oh, they have tons of, I love that they have like a wall of zines. When you go in, turn to the left, there's a bunch of zines there.
Yeah.
I've been telling Bay Street's like, where? We want zines. We want zines. And they're like, we don't have any room for it. They don't sell, Justin. And I was like, I know, but
I want zines.
I want zines.
To me, that's what a video store is.
That's what I love going into Suspect, and they're just being like, zines that have been there for years collecting dust. And
That's
you're
right.
like, oh, let me go through. What we got here? That's what I love. But Bay Street, put those zines up. Zines.
Zines.